Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us at Q Plus EDU as we explore finding inclusive professional development as part of our work in education advocacy. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll share our resources list, or a way to get to our resources list, which includes some good PD as well as trainings and classroom resources and lesson plans that have been recommended to us from our colleagues. And as we go along, I do want to say, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. If you're like me and won't remember them until the end, definitely feel free to throw those in as placeholders, and I'll get to them as I can. We should have live captioning available on this webinar. If it's not working for whatever reason, rest assured that when the video is available next month, it will be captioned. All right, so your presenter today is me. My name is Frederick Heather. My pronouns are they, them in English and AA in Spanish, and I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator. I live and work on Comanche, Tonkawa, Jumanos, and Coahuiltecan land, also known as Austin, Texas. And let's see, what other things did I want to make sure I include? Oh yeah, for our viewers who may be blind or have low vision, or for folks who are joining us over the phone, I am a white genderqueer person. I'm wearing black glasses. I have blonde hair that's pulled back and it's shaved on the sides. I have white earrings on, and I'm wearing a blue and red plaid shirt over a gray tank top that I don't know if you can see in the video. And as far as who I am, anything about me, I am a bisexual person. I'm genderqueer. I also use the labels non-binary and trans, depending on the context. I also use the labels queer and pansexual, depending on the context. I'm originally from California, but I've been in Austin, I've been in Texas for a little over 10 years at this point, and I've been with Out Youth since 2018. So I'm really excited to talk with y'all about professional development and how we can make our classrooms more inclusive. Move the video so you can see the slides here. There we go. So we could absolutely do a whole professional development training on trauma, and I'm sure that some of them exist. But for now, we'll just offer the reminder that as a rule, all educators should be trauma informed. You need to know how to help students prepare for and cope with the less humane parts of humanity. And this is just as important for LGBTQ to IA2+ students as it is for Black students, as it is for Native students. So whether you're learning about Stonewall, whether you're teaching about the Tulsa Massacre, or you're talking with your students about the occupation of Alcatraz, you need to think about what kind of impact those historical traumas can have on the students who share identities with those folks. A big part of that preparation comes from being able to self-regulate your own emotions as you're guiding the discussion. So the more of your own stuff that you've worked through privately with a therapist, the better. Similarly, the better acquainted you are with the complicated truths of US history, like the fact that all of our founding fathers were enslavers, or that historically white women's rights have been pitted against the rights of people of color. And the same is true for poor white folks and working class folks as well. The more acquainted you are with those things, the better you'll be able to foster constructive conversation in your classroom when those topics come up spontaneously. And so you won't be derailed by feelings that rightfully come up when we're talking about these things, like frustration, anger, embarrassment, shame, indignation. One of the resources that we're including in the resources guide for you is an article from understood.org. It's got some great tips specifically on trauma in the classroom. So on this slide here, the first thing that we want to talk about are the effects of trauma. So trauma has both short-term and long-term effects on the brain and the body. Trauma can be acute, it can be chronic, it can be complex, or it can be any combination of those three. and it can directly impact learning ability. COVID-19 is a great, unfortunate example. Children are not exempt from the trauma and loss caused by the global pandemic. Social distancing, mask policies, access to vaccines, all of those things can and do affect students' physical and mental health, which brings us to mental health. Students working through their own mental health stuff, including eating disorders, ADHD, depression, anxiety, autism, grief, dyslexia, etc. They need compassion and they need support to be their best in class. Some of those mental health things are related to ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences can include things like witnessing or being subjected to violence, losing a loved one to suicide, separation from a caregiver due to deportation or incarceration, environmental factors, historical trauma, and many more. And a lot of those things are linked to systems of oppression. And while the next generations are proving to be more open-minded, children and teens are also unfortunately not exempt from things like racism and sexism and transphobia or Islamophobia. And unfortunately, the murder of children like Tamir Rice proves that. So one of the links that we're sharing in the resources section is from Learning for Justice. It's an article by Paul Gorski on equity literacy. And Gorski uses that term as opposed to cultural competence or cultural proficiency. And it's definitely worth a read. Another piece that we've included is from Dr. Michelle Nario-Redmond, the author of Ableism, The Causes and Consequences of Disability Prejudice. Dr. Nario-Redmond explains the ABCs of prejudice include our affective, so our emotional and attitudinal reactions, the behaviors, actions, practices, and policies that discriminate, and the cognitive beliefs, stereotypes, and ideologies that go beyond general negativity. So examining your own privileges and oppressions, which are messy and overlapping, is critical to being able to notice when your students are facing micro or even macro aggressions. And you're likely familiar with all these terms already since you're watching this webinar, but just as a refresher, racism is the system of oppression that upholds white supremacy and perpetuates anti-Blackness, as well as harm against Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and other people of color. It's often closely linked to xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. Classism is the system that upholds wealth inequality and educational inequality. Ableism perpetuates harm against people with real or perceived physical and/or mental disabilities. Sizeism or fat phobia revolves around the politics of appearance and desirability, where fat people are actively shamed for their bodies. I combined cissexism and heterosexism here as cishet sexism, which are the systems of oppression that enforce being straight and cisgender as the norm and the only desirable genders and sexuality. And all of these, classism, ableism, sizeism, cissexism, heterosexism, sexism in general, all of them rely on white supremacy culture and settler colonialism to thrive. And these are just a few of the many systems of oppression that your students face on a daily basis. So thank you for joining us to learn more about getting trained to support them. From Black Lives Matter to Stop Asian Hate, the need for hashtagable slogans to combat racist violence shows how prevalent race and ethnicity-based crimes are. Even places that appear liberal, like California, saw a 31% surge in hate crimes in 2020. In Houston, hate crimes rose 88% from 2019 to 2020. So anti-Blackness is not only about unjust biases towards Black folks. All people of color may be subjected to anti-Blackness through colorism, which is the reality that lighter-skinned people of color are often viewed more favorably than their darker-skinned peers. Both anti-indigeneity and anti-Blackness are anchored by capitalism and the commodification of bodies and labor, again, overlapping with ableism, sexism, etc., etc. Most, if not all, racist and xenophobic ideas spring either from settler colonialism or white supremacy, or both. Because again, all these things are knotted up together. Andrea Smith's paper titled Indigeneity, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, which we link to in the resources, does an exponentially better job of explaining these concepts than I do, so definitely be sure to read that one. Did you know that in other countries, they learn in history classes that the Puritans who colonized what is now called the US and Canada were religious extremists? That's not what I was taught in history class. And Christian supremacy is closely tied into white supremacy in the US too. So we've included resources on supporting students who are dealing with Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, because religious persecution is distinct and separate from xenophobia and issues of citizenship status, though again, they are often linked and overlapping. One of the best things that you can do to support your Black, Indigenous, and people of color students is to advocate alongside them for police-free schools. The outsourcing of school discipline to police disproportionately impacts Black students. They're arrested between 3 and 8 times as often as white students. And students with disabilities are also arrested at between 3 and 10 times as often as their peers. We've got a bunch of resources on police-free schools in the resources section for you. So you already know that hungry students aren't learning. And while certainly not every teacher or school perpetuates systems of class oppression that tend to lead to the subjugation of the working poor, we all live in late stage capitalism. And you may recognize that things like gifted and talented programs often perpetuate both racial and class inequities. You also know that issues of incarceration, documentation status, police violence, all things that can and do hinder caregivers' abilities to support their kiddos' education are both class and race issues as well. So, classism and poverty are made up of a number of factors. A few of the things that we have listed here are wealth inequality, which often leads to lack of education, food insecurity, and lack of medical care. And all of these things can compound and result in homelessness. Numbers from a 2016-2017 study estimate that 2.1% of all students enrolled in public schools in Texas are unhoused. That study showed that in Louisville ISD, which is near DFW, more than 1/3 of homeless students reported living in hotels or motels. While in 2 Texas school districts, United ISD, which is in Laredo, and San Antonio ISD, those districts reported that more than 30% of their homeless students were unsheltered. Additionally, a recent study from Chapman Hall at the University of Chicago found that LGBTQIA+ young people are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTQIA+ youth. According to True Colors United, about 7% of youth in the US are LGBTQ, while 40% of youth experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ. Norma Mercado, the homeless liaison for Bastrop ISD, which is over here near Austin, said that rather than being caused by displacements from natural disasters like hurricanes and wildfires, the rising homelessness there in Bastrop has been caused by deeper and less sporadic problems, including gentrification, poverty, lack of affordable housing, unemployment, underemployment, all those things that are affecting a lot of the cities in Texas. Unhoused students trail their peers by 10 percentage points or more in math, reading, and science. 18% of them have learning disabilities. Nearly that many are still learning English, and virtually all of them experience stress and trauma. So breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness, we know it's not easy, but we also know that education can be one way out of it. Also based in anti-Blackness, settler colonialism, and capitalism, ableism is prejudice against disabled people, including those with real or perceived mental or physical disabilities. Dr. Nario Redmond explains, disappointment, disregard, discomfort, and disdain are provoked in part because disability is a group that anyone can join at any time, and that's scary. Disability is a social status that incites both hostile and benevolent forms of prejudice, a group that provokes stereotypes of incompetence and dependency, and behaviors that range from staring and unwanted assistance to abandonment and dehumanization and hate crimes. Hostile ableism can include ableist language like the R slur and other formerly diagnostic labels, including crazy, insane, dumb, stupid, lame, schizo, bipolar, or OCD, among many others. English is full of ableist language. Other hostile ableist examples are avoiding disabled people out of the misguided fear that they're contagious, and using disability as a punchline. And the policy in the US of revoking disabled folks' benefits if they get married is pretty damn hostile. Ambivalent ableism shows up at films without captioning, desks that don't move, events held upstairs with no elevator, facilities that illegally exclude service animals, etc. Paternalistic ableism, sometimes called benevolent ableism, can be things like calling disabled people inspirational, fetishizing them, or only rewarding them with support services or care if they are subordinate, docile, and grateful. Since our culture has long equated disability with wheelchairs, it's not surprising that invisibility within ableism relates to the mistrust of people who share that they have disabilities that are not immediately noticeable. That can include things like traumatic brain injury, fibromyalgia, epilepsy, all kinds of things. And fat phobia and sizeism are also linked with ableism, not because being fat is a disability, but because the politics of appearance and desirability, which are based in white supremacy, are also based on shaming and infantilizing fat people in the same way that disabled people are often infantilized and shamed. All of it is about policing bodies. So the importance of the fight for bodily autonomy and reproductive justice cannot be overstated for the lives of LGBTQ, fat, disabled, trans folks, all those communities. All right. At the end of today's presentation, we'll share our extensive resource list with you, which includes professional development and classroom resources for all of those things that we just talked about. But for the rest of this presentation, I wanted to give you a sneak peek into Be a Beacon, which is the professional development curriculum that OutYouth put together for K-12 staff in Texas. We wanted to focus on creating supportive learning environments for LGBTQIA2+ students. And we strongly encourage all staff, not just teachers and counselors and admin, but also bus drivers and food service workers and cafeteria staff and janitorial staff and even SROs at schools that are not police-free yet, to go through at least level 1 of Be a Beacon. So level 1 of Be a Beacon covers LGBTQIA+ 101 and intervening in bullying and harassment. We included intervening in bullying and harassment in level 1 that we want all staff to do because we have heard so often from students that adults are present when they're being bullied and nobody does anything. And so we really wanted to confirm for adults and affirm for students that adults have a legal responsibility to intervene and protect the students that they're serving. Level 2 covers navigating difficult conversations, which includes a know your rights training specifically for educators, because I get asked all the time by teachers, can I even say the word gay in class? It is Texas. And yes, you can. The other part of level 2 is supporting a student who comes out to you, because nobody ever gets trained in that, and we figured it was time. And then level 3 is integrating intersectional queer content into curricula. So learning how to actually talk about LGBTQ+ folks, no matter what subjects you teach, and spreading allyship off campus. The learning objectives for level 1 include identifying ways to improve mental health outcomes for LGBTQIA+ youth and understanding your responsibilities under state and federal law, as well as your district and school policies. Level 2 learning objectives are learning strategies to alert administrators to your and your students' legal rights and responding with compassion and curiosity when a student comes out to you as LGBTQIA+. The goals for level 3 are to leave you able to adopt at least 5 LGBTQIA2+ examples for use in your classroom instruction, and to be able to advocate for the LGBTQ community in your everyday life. So you get a sneak peek of levels 1 and 2 in this webinar today. Your 101 sneak peek includes everyone's favorite thing from level 1, which is the 4 boxes. I can't take credit for this one, not my idea, but this visual we've been told, is one of the most helpful ways to conceptualize all of these different categories. So in the top left-hand side here with the little green person, it says sex assigned at birth. And the question that goes with that is, what parts were you born with? And that is its own one little box. Below that, with the little yellow person, says gender identity. What gender do you identify with? Next to that, bottom right with the red person, says sexual orientation. Who are you attracted to? Then above that, in the top right, is gender expression, the happy little purple person. How do you show the world how you feel inside? And so what we hope this conveys, what we're really trying to get across to folks, is that all four of these things are separate and distinct, and they don't necessarily influence each other. They can, for a lot of people they do, but each of these four components of someone's identity are separate, unique things. So someone could be assigned male at birth, they could identify as a woman, their sexual orientation could be agender, but their gender expression could be masculine. So they don't have to match. And that's the biggest thing that we want to convey to folks, is that all of these things are separate and distinct and unique, and they don't have to match. So for our 102 sneak peek, this slide, this graphic is from the 2017 GLSEN National School Climate Survey. And I'll read you everything that's on here because there's a lot going on. So figure 2.26, school harassment, assault policies, and frequency of hearing anti-LGBTQ remarks, which is the percentage of LGBTQ students hearing these remarks often or frequently. And so the color coding on here, on the left-hand side in yellow, we have no policy, which means the school doesn't have any anti-bullying policy whatsoever. The gray is for a generic policy. The next one after that is the light blue, which is a partially enumerated policy. And then the green on the far right of each of the bar graphs is a comprehensive policy. And I'll explain the difference between those two in just a second. I do want to go through the different categories that are on here. So the one on the far left is gay used in a negative way. You all know what I'm talking about. The next one after that is no homo. In the middle, we have other homophobic remarks. Next to that is negative remarks regarding gender expression. And then the last one is negative remarks about trans people. So a generic policy, the gray bar here, is we don't allow bullying. Very meh. The partially enumerated policy is interesting because those are the policies that we see more often in Texas. A partially enumerated policy may be great in certain areas. It may say we won't tolerate bullying on the basis of race or ethnicity or religion or creed or skin color. It might enumerate on those levels, but most of the time when we're talking about this specifically for LGBTQ students, it either won't include sex or gender, or it'll only include those in that way. Whereas a comprehensive policy needs to be enumerated. And so it needs to spell out all of the different things that students may be bullied for. And so the best example of a comprehensive anti-discrimination, anti-bullying policy in Texas is El Paso Independent School District. Let's give El Paso a hand, because it not only covers sex and gender, it covers sex and gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation, and perceived gender and gender identity and sexual orientation. And all of these things are super important because we know that the more you spell it out, the more these negative things the students hear go down. So as you can see from this graph, the difference between having no policy and having a comprehensive policy, the minimum that it reduced those negative remarks is at least 13%, 11%. I can math. So it's really remarkable what a difference it is. And so in 102 of Be a Beacon, we go a lot more into why it's important to intervene in bullying and harassment, but we really wanted to showcase the importance of comprehensive, inclusive, enumerated anti-bullying policies. And so that's what this graph does for us. All right, moving on to our 201 sneak peek. So 201 is all about your rights as an educator and what legal protections you have if you are speaking up on behalf of your LGBTQIA2+ students. So these are just a few of them. So starting in 1868 on the left side of our screen with the 14th Amendment, we go all the way back to the Constitution for this one. You're also protected under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VII, Title IX from 1972, FERPA from 1974, the Equal Access Act in 1984. And that one in particular is important for GSA clubs because that's the federal law that says that schools that receive any amount of federal funding can't deny students the right to form a gender and sexuality alliance club if the school allows, or the district, depending on where those decisions are made, but if other non-curricular clubs are allowed. So if your school has an anime club, they can't tell you that you can't have a GSA. Definitely reach out to me, talk to me if you're running into issues with the GSA. Another important legal decision on here is the 2003 Supreme Court case of Lawrence v. Texas. For some context, 2003 is the year that I graduated high school. That was the year that finally sodomy laws were struck down by the Supreme Court, which is what essentially makes the no promo homo laws that we used to have on the, well, there's technically still on the books in Texas, but this Supreme Court decision is what makes those things unconstitutional. Obergefell in 2015 is the landmark Supreme Court decision on marriage equality. Again, can't be marriage equality if disabled folks can't get married without losing their benefits, but marriage equality on the basis of you, the gender of you and your partner doesn't matter when it comes to who gets married. And then you may remember, I hope you do, 2020 in the summertime, the Bostock decision in the Supreme Court was the first time at the federal level that it was decided that LGBTQ folks can't be fired just for being queer. So yay for the Supreme Court. All right, level 2, 201, oh, sorry, level 2, 202 is the piece of the training about supporting a student who comes out to you. So we get asked, you know, what do I do when a student comes out to me? And the very first thing you need to do is say, thank you. And then you can use our handy little tough conversation formula here. So I worked at the National Domestic Violence Hotline for 7 years, and this kind of strategy was one of the things that we would use often when we're talking to survivors to make sure that we were moving the conversation forward in a productive way. And so you want to validate, educate, and investigate. Validate for a student coming out to you can simply be, that's awesome. You don't have to be really in depth with it. Educate can be sharing resources. It can be letting them know, you know, what kind of programs the school has, what your community has, any of those kinds of things. And then investigating is asking thoughtful and appropriate and useful open-ended questions. And so the 3 questions that we recommend are who, what, and how. So you want to ask, who else have you told about this? And you want to make sure that when you ask that, your tone is really upbeat and not accusatory or judgy. You don't want to ask, who else have you told about this? Because that makes it sound a little bit suspicious. But who else have you told about this means you're excited for them and you want to know if they're out to other people, because that can help you decide what's the safest way to move forward with them. Our what question is, what does that label mean to you? And you may not have time to get into this with your students, but asking this as a clarifying question can help fill in the gaps for you, because one of the things that we know is that everyone who uses different labels, they mean something different to each of us. And so when I say that I'm non-binary and my coworker says that they're non-binary, it may not mean the same thing to the two of us. So having those really personal conversations and asking your students, what does that mean to you? Will give you a much better idea of where they're coming from. And then the how question, you probably figured this one out. How can I help you? What is it your students are looking for from you? Are they wanting your support in coming out to their parents? Are they wanting your support in talking to the principal or to their other teachers? Or are you the last one to know and they're just filling you in? And if you are the last one to know, that's not a problem either. They're just telling you, which is always a good sign. All right. So all of this wonderful information can be found at beabeacontx.org. Level 1 is currently available for purchase at Be a Beacon. Level 2 and level 3 should be available by the end of the month. All of those are in English. We aim to have all 3 levels available in Spanish by the first quarter of 2022. All right, and I will leave it on this screen for a few moments. This is how you can get to the resources guide that we put together that highlights all of the different professional development opportunities, the different classroom resources, the lesson plans, and some of them are also just articles so you can familiarize yourself with different topics. But we've got resources on racism and classism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and ableism and fat phobia and gender and sexuality and trauma. And you can use this URL here, which is http://tiny.cc/inclusive and then capital P, capital D. Or you can scan the QR code on your screen. And if you use this resource, if you find it helpful, if there are things that you want to add to it, or if you go through some of the things that are on there and you're like, Frederick, that professional development training was a joke. We also accept feedback. We welcome feedback. And you can always email that to me at frederick@txgsa.org. So I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I do want to open it up for questions if we have any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I will leave you with all of the fabulous rainbow flag hearts that we can muster. And so you've got lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer. There's no flag for queer. Intersex, asexual, and then the plus can encompass any of these other things that are down here and many more. We've got non-binary, genderqueer, agender, bigender, gender fluid, two-spirit. And then below that, we've got pansexual, polysexual, demisexual, aromantic, and then the red ribbon for HIV and AIDS. So thank you all so much for being here with us. We really appreciate you looking for inclusive professional development so that you can support all of your students in learning and showing up and being their best selves at school. We know it's not easy. We know you've got one of the toughest jobs in the world. And really, it's our honor and our pleasure to be here to support you in doing that really great and necessary work. We also want to invite everyone to join us back next week and the week after that as we continue Q+EDU. On Monday, we've got our special Lunch and Learn session at noon Central Time, where Sarah Bachman-Williams from Southwest Love Fest is going to be talking about navigating cheating and boundary violations in monogamous and non-monogamous relationships. Wednesday, Out Youth staff therapist Cassidy Laminack is going to be talking about interview questions for your child's potential therapist. Thursday, we've got a couple of youth advisory board members from One Love who are going to be talking to us about how to ask someone out and handle the response you get. Friday is our panel discussion with youth from Texas and beyond on centering queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color students in your GSA. And then we have a special Saturday session next week on the 21st. It will be at 1 p.m. Central Time because all of our presenters are coming to us from halfway around the world. It is going to be learning from African LGBTQIA+ leaders, and we are super, super thrilled to have everybody joining us for that one. We've also got tons of great stuff the last week of August, so go to q+edu.org, check out our calendar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.